So, good afternoon, everyone. Today, with our session, Mind the Gap, Gender Responsive Urban Mobility Planning. It's a training developed by Mobilize Your City and TUMI, and in collaboration with Women Mobilize Women and with the technical support of HEAT. So, a few regulations before we start this session. So, make sure that your mic is muted and your camera is off. This session will be recorded, so if you don't want to appear in the recording, please keep your camera off and include your questions in the chat so we can have at the end a Q&A session at the end of the presentations. Yeah. So first, So the first part of the session, we're gonna cover more or less the gender. What is gender, and why does it matter in mobility planning? Then we will explain Mobilize Your City approach to sustainable urban mobility planning. And then the second half of this session, we're gonna understand how gender is reflected in the SUMPs, and we were gonna bring a case from Colombia on gender and how it's embedded in active mobility. And the last part is about your questions and closing remarks. We have four speakers with us. I would like to welcome first Keisha from Urban Mobility Specialist at GIZ. She works with TUMI and Mobilize Women to advance inclusive and sustainable transport solution. She brings expertise in active mobility, gender responsive planning, and community-centered transport initiatives. The second speaker is Gail, is a gender expert with HEAT, specializing in integrating gender's perspective into mobility, transport policy, and climate projects. She has extensive experience in research, training, and advocacy for equitable transport systems. Our third speaker is Paula. She's also a gender expert at HEAT, where she focuses on mainstreaming gender equity across sustainable mobility and climate initiatives. Her work emphasizes participatory approaches and the empowerment of underrepresented groups in transport planning. And our last speaker is Diana, is an independent consultant specializing in sustainable mobility and gender. She supports organizations in designing inclusive mobility policies, projects that promote accessibility, safety, and equity for all users. So the overall learning objective of this session is to understand why gender matters in urban mobility planning and to be introduced to the main principles and structure of gender responsive SUMPs. And the last one is to learn how to integrate gender at each stage of the SUMPs process. And I would like to remind you all, from all participants, to fill out the feedback before leaving this session. So here I will give the floor to Keisha to explain what is gender and why does it matter in urban mobility planning. So I will stop sharing my screen. So Keisha.
Thank you so much, Karin. I will share my screen now. And if you didn't catch that, hi everybody, my name is Keisha. I am working with TUMI and Women Mobilize Women, and I'm happy to be here and hear more about this latest publication we have. So before that, I want to go over what is gender and why it matters in mobility planning. I hope you can see my screen. Yeah. So before that, I want to introduce who we are as Women Mobilize Women. So Women Mobilize Women is a leading global initiative on women in transport, and we seek to actively transform the transport sector to become more diverse and inclusive. We work to empower everyone's right to the city and its strong networks and leverages upon Germany's feminist development policy. And by embracing a feminist perspective, we challenge the patriarchal status quo and envision cities that cater to the diverse needs and experiences of every individual, irrespective of gender identity, sexual orientation, skin color, disability, or other characteristics. We are funded by the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, or BMZ, and we're being implemented through the Transformative Urban Mobility Initiative. And of course, we work with partners locally and globally, regionally, worldwide, who are working on this topic. So to get into this, Women Mobilize Women, we empower transport workers, transport users, and decision makers. Because women are not homogenous, which we will talk about throughout this webinar, and we need to target women to be part of society and see how mobility is really an important aspect of how women and other people who are traditionally marginalized move in the world. So what do we mean by gender? So, gender doesn't mean sex. It's not just male, female, but it's the social roles, norms, and expectations that shape how women and men and gender diverse people experience the world. Meaning, it's not just about you being a woman or whatever we're born with in terms of a biological sense, but how the world and how society has shaped what roles we should have to play or what we're supposed to play as men or women. And why it does it matter in cities? Because you could see it in the travel patterns of men and women. So a lot of our cities were built for a typical 9 to 5 male who just goes to work. And what happens to the women who are in between or maybe need to do other things? Women are typically doing different trips or trip chaining, as they say, meaning maybe a bus schedule that goes from 9 to 5, like peaks at 9, around 9, or peaks at around 5. But what about the other things that women and other people do in the middle? It doesn't, the transport doesn't serve them if we don't think about everybody else who's not working in 9 to 5. A key point is that urban mobility is not neutral. It reflects inequalities built in our societies. So just because our cities are like this, it doesn't mean that it should be like this. We have to build cities and transport systems that cater to actually 50% of the world, which is women. So the feminist lens, when we're talking about the feminist transport system here, doesn't only look at women, but challenges the social norms at which we look at for the benefit of those who are traditionally marginalized. Meaning, I know the word feminist could be scary, but what we mean to say is that we are challenging. How come we don't see more women in the streets in whatever city that you're in? How come we don't see children, persons with disabilities, or other people on the streets? Maybe because we're not building the cities for them. So, yeah, we are calling it feminist because women who take up 50% of the world, it's not, cities are not built for women. So let's go to the next slide. And how does gender shape mobility? I mentioned it earlier by the travel patterns. Women usually are typically walking, cycling, and using public transport more. Studies show across many cities that car ownership among women is lower than compared to men. So, or in typical cities like in Asia, it's usually women who are depending on men for their transport. Like they need a car, they need to wait for their husband or their fathers to bring them to somewhere. So travel patterns also allow or disallow women from doing from doing different activities like going to work or going to the market. Access barriers, like safety concerns, like harassment, lighting, station design, affordability, and time poverty. You can see it also in the way that we design not just infrastructure, but also how society treats women. You can see this in the way that maybe there are dark parts in the city that we, I mean, maybe some people don't think, oh no, it's fine, it's just dark. But maybe for women, it's a higher risk for them to pass through certain areas. And if you improve the lighting, or if you have a society that takes care of women and traditionally marginalized people, it makes it safer for everybody else. And then we also have to think about intersectionality, because I mentioned earlier that women are not homogenous. There are different kinds of women out there, just like there are different kinds of people out there. And gender interacts with age, disability, income, and caregiving roles, meaning maybe there are in different parts of the world women are more typically choosing 9 to 5 jobs as well, or having different roles, or doing gig work. And we have to think about and ask ourselves, who do we want to see using our transport system, and who might we be excluding in our transport system? So designing only for the average male commuter leaves out large parts of the population. And now getting into this importance of planning transport with a feminist lens. Again, with feminist transport, as I mentioned earlier, doesn't only cater to women, but it challenges how we are seeing the world already. It's about designing our transport and mobility systems around us for the widest subset of transport users. If you design for with women and girls in mind, you design for everyone. If you design for persons with disabilities, for children, for young people in mind, we're designing for everybody. Everybody can use this. And this requires challenging the systemic gender gap that we have now in planning, in urban planning, in transport, in the way that we build cities. So one indicator that I always like to challenge people with is, and I mentioned this earlier, is how many women do you actually see on your commute going to anywhere? Or how many younger women, children, persons with disabilities do you see in the world? Maybe you don't see enough, or maybe it's not the norm in where you are. But maybe we should think about how do we encourage more people to enjoy the city and to take part in society. So, because everybody has the right to safe, affordable, and accessible mobility. So, I'm going to stop there. I just wanted to frame that before we get into what this is all about, which is on uh, designing the SUMP. But before I pass it to the next speaker, I also want to invite everybody to join this Global Alliance for Feminist Transport. Um, we have a meet and greet tomorrow, but you can also join and check out the website for any updates on if you want to keep working on this topic. And thank you. That's it from me. I pass it back to Karina.
Thank you, Keisha, for this introduction about what is gender and yeah, yeah. So in general, like so gender goes beyond women. It's much more than that. And now I will give you a short presentation on MobiliseYourCity approach to sustainable urban mobility planning. So here we go again. Uh, so yeah. Uh, so with the sustainable urban mobility, when we talk about, you, you're not seeing my screen, or oh, sorry. Uh, okay, the stars. Okay, so yeah, so yeah. So what is urban mobility planning, and how kind of it goes beyond what is traditional. So from before transport planning, it used to focus on traffic, with primarily focusing on the infrastructure, more car oriented. It is more from an engineering perspective, and it missed the human side of it. So now with like when we focus on when we say sustainable urban mobility, so it's primarily we put people at the center, with like how to increase their accessibility, to make their access to everyday life services easier, because if there is no access for them, they will be marginalized. And this is the case could be also for women when they are not when the needs is quite not similar, and not fully satisfied. And so we also in this approach we try to create an integrated mobility plan that brings different modes of transport together instead of only relying on cars, and so on. So it's more making it more functional, more feasible for everyone, and affordable for all. And yeah. And from this perspective, here it comes the position of Mobilize Your City vision for sustainable urban mobility. So many Mobilize Your City and many other stakeholders advocates for a more comprehensive approach when dealing with urban mobility issues. Sustainable mobility here, it combines the concept of sustainable development with urban mobility, and considering the different dimensions of development and the effective provision of mobility services for all. This means that sustainable urban mobility should therefore be low carbon and efficient and safe and just for all. And this is it equals sustainable mobility. So by placing people at the heart of any transport planning that we do, all mode and transport and services contribute to the same goal and at the scale of the functional urban area. And through Mobilize Your City, so since we are in a European partnership and we have we try to implement we are implementing the European SUMPs, so we aim to advocate also for equity. So the main concept here is equity because so by having building an access for everyone to be able to access job, different types of services like education, health. And it is urban mobility. It is when you talk about equity, it's representing a high share of daily wages. And it is when in cities worldwide we see a more car oriented. It's we need to advocate to move beyond that, so to make so the cities more equitable for all. And when it's car oriented, it's like really creating marginalizing certain communities, people. And the last one is to make public transport better with active modes for social equity. And here it is reflected all of this Mobilize Your City vision and approach in the SUMPs. So the SUMPs in the overall is a strategic plan developed in a participatory and integrated way to meet people's and businesses mobility needs in cities, and to harmonize and integrate existing planning approaches. So it has 4 phases, and we will cover that later during in the presentation with Paula. And there are the concept of sustainable urban mobility planning is based on commonly accepted 8 principles, and they have those 8 principles from the EU have 8 implications on mobilize your cities. So we work with cities worldwide, from Latin America, Africa, Latin America and the Pacific, of course, and the Caribbean. And we have also Asia and these countries. And also we have few cities from EU, from Europe, that they will benefit from those implications of the SUMPs. So because mostly the cities that I mentioned before in those continents, they face rapid urbanization, which is the mobility planning cannot address all their needs. Also, the gender perspective is sometimes is missing. So what we can so with those needs and challenges can be addressed through the SUMPs that Mobilize Your City developed. So by addressing the need of increasing technical capacities of local government, bring opportunities to establish governance and institutional frameworks compatible with sustainability principles, a chance to maintain low level of private motorization, and a high modal share of walking. So here we promote active mobility and the urgency to transform and regulate paratransit services, which are the main, if not the only mode of public transport in many cities worldwide. And here I'm sharing with you like a few of the publications of Mobilize Your City guidelines, and the main one is the SUMPs. and along many other guidelines that we developed along the years that tackles climate change, land use and urban mobility planning, participatory processes in urban mobility planning, and then now, well, like, and the new one is the mainstream gender in SUMPs. And yeah. So now, after my presentation, we will move to Paula and Gail to understand better from a gender blind to gender responsive SUMPs. We're gonna present this by kind of this publication. So Paula and Gail, the floor is for you.
Hi, you've got me first, and then you'll have Paula. Very nice to be here. So very quickly, what I would like to just go through is the theoretical frameworks behind the development of the topic guide. But before that, to give you some background about why the topic guide was developed, because we've heard from Keisha about how gender is really important in transport and mobility. And I think that's probably something that most of us who are attending this webinar know. And also the importance of developing SUMPs and how important it is to plan for gender when developing SUMPs. So those are two, a lot of us, we understand how important gender is in transport, and we understand how important it is to have gender in our planning. So in the last 2 years or so, together with Paula and Heat Consultancy, we looked at 22 cities who were supported by MobiliseYourCity to develop their SUMPs. And we had a look at to what extent gender is included in the SUMPs. Is gender taken into account in the various steps to develop a SUMP? And if so, why? What was the motivation? And how and in what way, and how was it mainstreamed? Was it ad hoc? How was gender really included in the SUMPs? And by and large, we found that gender was not included particularly. So we developed a list of the kind of gaps that we saw in the SUMPs and recommendations of how the SUMPs could take gender into account at every single stage or phase, as we call it in the SUMPs. So this topic guide was developed out of a 2-year research that really tried to understand through key informant interviews, through desktop reviews, document analysis of how gender was or wasn't taken into account in SUMPs, and what the gaps are in understanding or in knowledge or in capability possibly, and develop a topic guide that can mitigate those gaps so that moving forward we have possibly a different approach to undertaking SUMPs. So I will just very quickly go through the kind of main theoretical framework that we've worked with in the topic guide, which is that we have tried to move beyond gender sensitive approaches to designing transport systems. So that is really a very baseline kind of intervention, providing minimum standards of gender, meeting gender needs. So we have tried to work with and recommend steps to take so that you can develop something that could be more gender responsive, or better still, moving toward gender empowerment or transformative interventions. So can move on to the next slide. I'm not actually sure which one I have next. So you can move on. I want to get to okay, we've dealt with that. You can move on. You can move on, sorry, because Keisha's dealt with this. Okay, so gender mainstreaming, again, this is possibly something that most of us understand, but that is the process of assessing the implications for women and men of any planned action.
White tape, then I'll tape this side.
So I can hear somebody else speaking. So we need to make men and women concerns and experiences an integral dimension of the design, implementation, and of every single step of a SUMP. So, and ultimately the goal is to achieve gender equality or equity. So the goal of gender mainstreaming is not to provide transport that serves the needs of women or serves the needs of men, or particularly, but the goal is to achieve gender equity, which is a very different goal. So A gender-sensitive approach might simply be that if women need safer sidewalks or better lighting, that is a gender-sensitive approach, and that would possibly meet or mitigate a very immediate need. But gender mainstreaming's ultimate goal is gender equity, which is a transformative and empowering approach to really change society, not just transport services. So that is what has underpinned our understanding of gender mainstreaming and the development of the
We lost her. Gail, you still with us? Paula, can you please continue?
Okay, Gail is lost. Yeah, unfortunately, maybe. Hello, everybody. Here, Paola Ramirez from here to Canberra. Okay, Gail was already explaining what is gender mainstreaming. Maybe can you continue with the next slide? Maybe in the next one. Okay, so when we review different ways of talking about gender, we identify that there is an approach, which would be the gender transformative approach, which are measures that really change the. Okay, wait a sec. Here, Gail could join again. Gail, better. Gail.
Okay, I'm back. Yeah, I mean,
I was just explaining transformative gender, but please
good.
go
I'm sure
ahead.
you can carry on. I knew Teams was going to time out. It always did, and I was very impressed how it timed out at the end of a sentence. But yeah, so really, what I was saying is that we are trying to move interventions from gender sensitive toward gender responsive, and ultimately to gender transformative. And which, as my slide says, these really look to addressing unequal power relations. And so not just provide immediate solutions to immediate mobility needs. And I think that's really the end of my story here, because Paula will now talk you through how to include gender and focus on gender mainstreaming in every single phase of the SUMP. Thanks.
Thanks, Gail. So now we can go to really the process itself. So as Karin was explaining, this approach of how we implement a SUMP is divided in different phases, specifically in 4 phases that has 11 steps. So what we did during this process is, when we review all the SUMPs from the 21 different cities, is to check in each of these steps how the cities they work, or they included gender, and identify where are the gaps and what can be done better in each of these steps. To briefly provide some context of the 4 big phases, the first phase, which is the preparation and analysis, is how we start, how we settle the team, how we settle the components of the contract, how we do the diagnosis, how we understand what's happening on the field in terms of gender. And once we have this preparation phase, once we have all the context in place and all the team in place, we move to the second phase, which is the vision. So it means where we want to go as a city. What do we want to have in the future? Of course, in this, we're thinking it in terms of gender. Where do we want to go in terms of gender in our sustainable urban mobility plan? In the third step, which so now we already have the settle the team, we define some vision, we go to the place to ask how we want to do it. So what are the measures that we're going to implement to get to the vision that we have built with all the stakeholders? So how, that's the question, how we're going to do it. And with it, we move to the fourth phase, which is how we're going to really implement it, how we said in the measures whether we're going to do it, but now it's like, okay, are we really doing it? Like the process, are we working in it? And we like, how is the implementation itself and all the monitoring related? So these are like the four big phases. And what we did in this guideline is to review in each of the steps how this gender perspective can be included. So we can move now to the next slide, which is like, okay, let's start. Phase 1, preparation and analysis. How do we prepare? Please go ahead. Step 0. And this is something like where we found out that most of like the biggest gap, it's in this step, because that's the contractual part. That's how we are going to, like, who is going to do the stamp for the city. And in most of the cities that we review, the TORs, the scope of work, the initial contractual components didn't include a specific requirement of having people or having some gender expertise. So if there is no gender expertise and there is no requirement to have a gender data collection or analysis in the whole process, nothing will happen. So we said we wanted to highlight this. But this is like the beginning, the readiness assessment. Step 1, if you go to the next slide, it's a team. So once we have the contract, there is a microphone. Thanks for muting it. So now it's a team, the working structure. So we need people that are really advocates in gender. That's why we mention here gender champions, people that have already worked in the past with this vision, that really want to advocate and bring this change, and they can contribute through all the process so that these gender lenses are included. One of the we're including through all the topic guide different examples from different cities, not only for the ones that we reviewed, but mostly the ones that we reviewed, but as well other cities of how they did. Here, for example, we have Kumasi, who had a specific gender champion working in the planning department that led this gender lens through all the process. So with people, we can make things real. So then once we set up the team, we go to step number 2. If you can go to the next slide, which is, where are we going to do it? Like, what's like general condition, geographic area, time frame, what's the key objectives? Like, what do we like? What specifically we want to get out of the SUMP, but as well to consider which existing gender disparities exist on the city. Now that it's settled, we can continue to the step 3, which is some like a point where we again would like you to focus on, is the gender diagnostics. What happens, as my previous colleagues have explained, traditionally transport has been focused on how men traditionally move historically and still today. And the way how we understand transport is that the man normally goes out at morning to commute to their work, 8 a.m., 9 a.m., goes to work, and then around 5 or 6 p.m., they come back. So that's why we have like peak moments during the day and get out of home, come back. But women move differently. And in all the cities, this patterns changes quite a lot. We have identified that there are trip changing approaches, so that women go to pick up the kids, they go to visit the grandma or the grandpa, they do some groceries. So this single pattern that normally men do of going out from work and then went out from the home and then to work, and at the end of the day come back, changes in women. So we need to get this data and to understand, to do this gender diagnosis of how it happens in the city, and only with data we can gather as well like the tool to say, hey, women move differently, and once we know that women move differently, we can address measures that specifically responds to their needs. So that's step 4. And once we have all this data and we understand what's going on with gender in the city, we move to a step 4. You can change. And I mean, this will be the second phase, which is, so now we have the data, we have the basic information, we have the team, we have the contract. That's phase 1. Now in phase 2, where do we want to get? What's the vision? So the first step in this phase 2, let's go ahead. It's scenarios. What do we mean with scenarios? It's, different scenarios that can exist that are plausible to have in the future. So some scenarios talking about gender, maybe with no gender lens. How would the city look like in the next 15, 20 years without gender lens? We evaluate a scenario with like more gender lens, but how can we know that's really gender lens? And how, besides data, how can we know that really the needs of the women are being considered? And that's why in this step, we encourage the participation of women and other marginalized groups, but that's why we include a specific women advocates groups, and we talk to them. So we ensure their participation, we collect their thinking, we capture their perspective, where they would like to get, so that the overall vision that we create have their perspective included. Now, when we develop these different scenarios of how it could look like, we move to the step number 5. Please, next slide. Next slide, sorry, this was duplicated, which is from the different scenarios that we consider, which is the one that we want, like what will be our vision. And we included some examples of visions in the topic guide. Here you see one of the Havana, for example. And in this vision that we hope you find inspiration from that, it's which sentence will create this aspirational narrative, this dreaming of where we want to, what we want to become. So this is more like to really like that everyone feel in their heart, hey, this is really where we want to get in the next 15 years. And it helps that all the policies that goes behind or goes after the SUMP the SUMP process itself corresponds to this vision. And that's why it's so important that we include everyone's voices in this vision. In the case of the Havana, for example, they wanted to focus a lot in promoting universal accessibility and public health improvements. The elderly population in La Habana is quite high, and that's why they particularly include this and like to foster the city's sustainable development and territorial cohesion, and particularly that citizens are a fundamental pillar of the SUMP. So as you see, depending on the needs of the city and depending on the voices of all these stakeholders that participate, we can build something that really matches to the people that live there. Once we have the vision, we move to the next step, please. Which is, okay, how are we going to measure it? Like, what are they, or maybe besides this vision, which will be the overall, where we want to go, it's which are the objectives. When we talk about objective with a gender perspective, how will it change women during this time? An example that we wanted to include is the increase of the proportion of female public transport users by 15% within the next within 5 years. Here, of course, by collecting disaggregated data on ridership at least once a year. So we are defining an objective that whose principles are SMART. It means that are specific, that are measurable, that are achievable, realistic, and timely. Over like general objectives that cannot be measured, like what do we do with it? So always when working with objectives and with indicators, we follow this principle of being SMART. And this objective, which is what we want to go, it's like we need to define it with indicators. So how will we measure it through the time? An example of indicator would be the number of reported and resolved cases of sexual harassment on public transport. This, as you may imagine, these indicators and these objectives need to correspond to the needs that we already identified in the past, with the data, with talking with the people, with involving the different stakeholders in the process. Now that we have the indicators or targets, we move to step 7, which is like, how are we going to do it? Phase 3, measure planning. Here we have some nice example of normally what has been planned in the past, of what's traditionally planned in a city in terms of a public bus. In a public bus, normally like they go around in frequent peak hour services. You look for the efficiency, you look for the speed, you look for direct connection, and this is what normally has been planned. But with this new vision, that like a gender lens vision, it's not only how we move efficiently, but it's that the way how we move correspond to the needs of the different vulnerable population. In these cases, in the picture shows, we have a woman carrying her baby, we have an elderly walking with some difficulty, we have kids in the bus. So the bus itself, like infrastructure itself, need to correspond to these needs. For example, having ramps so that it's easier for people to go into the car, different people with different mobility situations, and of course carrying things like a stroller. To have enough space to carry bags, to have enough space and comfortable space for the kids, and as well to have restrooms where we tend to use the toilet much more often, but to have these restrooms in different places in the transport system. These are some of the measures that should be implemented in this process. Now, please move to step 8. And how are we going to do that? Like, who will be responsible? That's the question here. So we already discussed what we want to do, like which measures we want to take to provide solutions to with this gender lens. But now the solutions need to have someone that is responsible, a team, a specific stakeholder, a specific institution. So having clear roles allows to have accountability, that this is having a positive, hopefully, process, but we are following up on what's going on there. So only with these responsibilities we can really define. Sorry, I was reading the question, so I lost a second track. But we can assure that that this is a follow-up. Please go on with the step 9. We're close to finalize the step. So now we discuss who is responsible. The second point is, how are we going to pay it? So it needs to have a budget. Without money, things cannot be done. Like teams as well need some budget to implement specific measures. So that's why one of our recommendations is to have gender-specific budgets, to have specific budget lines that corresponds to the initiatives that we develop in the measures, to have financial plans with different phases that corresponds to where we want to become. So having these milestones and having money to get there, we can like make these measures come true. And now with step 10, if you please continue, which is the implementation and monitoring. Please go ahead. Like, again, we already have like the measure, but we need to guarantee that there is a clear implementation. So for having a clear implementation, besides having the funding and the responsibles, is to securing this funding all around the process and providing regular training to the people, because people may change in the institution and sometimes this knowledge is lost. So if we provide regular training sessions, if we refresh the people on this understanding of gender and continue coordinating and following up, we can really guarantee that in implementation this vision is included. Then we can go to the next one. which is like, okay, the monitoring. So would be like step 11. Told you, like from 0, which is like how the people can provide some feedback. So how can we say that in the process itself, the channels exist, the way of communicate exists. This means to have constant or regular consultation with women's group to understand if everything what has been planned is implemented or if things are changing. So that's why SUMP itself, it's a process. It doesn't mean that it's finished. When a document is prepared, let's say the SUMP document, it's printed, but things can be improved, things can be new problems can be solved. So this is what we do with the monitoring, to follow or to check that the whole process or the mobility situation correspond to the gender needs, and that is constantly evolving according as well to the needs of the city. And with this, we finalize the process. Again, this was like the lessons learned, which is as well part of this, like to see what are we learning from all these things, and what can we change so that we can start again constantly identifying new measures. Here, I think now we can finalize and we can open to the questions.
Yes. So thank you, Paula and Gail, for this presentation. Yeah, I will try to see what. Yeah, so to just as a summary, like as we understand that gender goes beyond gender, so it's not like only between men and women, but it's more than that. It is about it's challenging the context, and also it's a process to include gender in urban mobility. So it doesn't happen in one day, but more is like it's a process, and yeah, through the SUMP we can implement this. We can advocate for gender. And the most important thing that it's about the financing. Like it doesn't also happen on its own, but we need budget and share awareness with the people, with different stakeholders, trying to build a culture of mobility that advocates for gender in specific contexts, let's say. So I will go back to, oh, wow, we have a lot of questions from the participants. And we have like around 7 minutes to take them. So, okay. Okay, Denmark and the Netherlands are two countries. Okay, Denmark and... Okay, I can start with the first. In Denmark and the Netherlands, women cycle more than often than men, but men cycle longer. The norm worldwide is that men cycle more than women in most cities because it's not safe to cycle. And the share of women cycling in a city is an indicator for how safe it is to cycle there. Okay, so this is more of a like a conversation between the participants. So men apparently when you talk about active mobility, they cycle more, and women less because of a safety concern. This is from examples from Denmark and the Netherlands. If I go later, yeah, okay. And there are still, okay, and here, okay, and I go that. It is definitely more common in cities to have more men cycling compared to women, that's for sure. That's what this one, the comment. But to have ownership of a bicycle is more accessible than private motorized vehicle in general. There are still many factors, of course, that prevent women from cycling, factors I mentioned earlier on perception of safety, infrastructure, culture, which can be addressed through holistic, sustainable urban mobility planning. So do you want to comment on this, because I think it's been asked many times. Keisha or Gail and sorry, and Paula.
No, I think that was my comment that you read earlier, which was just
Ah,
that to say that
yeah, sorry.
yeah, it was just a misreading of my notes, but definitely in most cases men do cycle more than women because of many factors. But yeah, I think there are other questions. That was a little bit of conversation at the start, but I think now there are more recent questions here at the bottom. But yeah, thanks for the conversation. And thank you for listening and catching that one.
Okay, and we have a question question also about how does this approach seven steps intersect with national policies, which often determine what infrastructure is to be delivered?
Maybe I can respond to that one. Thanks again. And that's the first phase. So in the first phase, we identify, like we do this first analysis of what exists. So what's the planning framework, what's the mobility situation, but as well which policies already are existing, and which gender considerations they have, so that we can align. But sometimes as well, these national policies don't consider this gender perspective, and that's something that as well we need to include in our view from the beginning. If they don't do it, then maybe with the SUMP, how can we start this change and make these policies change in the long term? That will be like the process of transforming as well the existing situation.
Okay. And we have another question. How can we ensure that gender mainstreaming in urban mobility policies goes beyond symbolic or superficial measures? And the second one, if you which concrete indicators can be used to measure if an urban mobility plan is truly gender responsive?
Gail wanted to respond to that.
Yeah.
I can respond and hope that my internet doesn't time out. When it comes to particularly understanding, sorry, oh, I could hear somebody speaking in the background. To understand, can you mute everybody from the background, Corinne? So if we want to try and understand or ensure that gender mainstreaming goes beyond symbolic or superficial measures, I think that, you know, obviously it's very difficult to ever ensure anything, but I think that one of the important beginnings is to understand that many interventions are symbolic or superficial. So I think that in many instances there isn't that recognition that these are in fact just symbolic or totemic or superficial measures. So and you know, I use the one about lighting often, because lighting, it seems like that is a very gender sensitive or responsive intervention, but you know, ultimately, to some extent, it's, you know, transport can't solve all the world's problems, but that is not really acknowledging the source of the problem, which is, you know, women are not afraid of the dark, but women are at risk of being attacked, and most often by men. So once we stop being too polite in many respects to really talk about the root causes of the problem, then we can start to understand what is symbolic or superficial. And that is not always a comfortable discussion to have. And that's where we need to start understanding things like sexism, and start talking about the patriarchy, which are things that are not often discussed in transport planning, because it's not always seen as a social science. So I mean, that is where I would say where we need to start. Yes, and what you will find in the topic guide is an example of what are kind of basic minimum interventions, and then how to build on those kind of interventions until you get something that is more transformative and empowering. So that is I mean, that could be like a 2-day discussion, that answer. So I'm going to stop there.
And we have more questions from the participants, but yeah, and we're running. So before we go into the last part of this session, so one question is about, do you have more examples of smart KPIs, maybe also from an infrastructure point of view, not only in terms of co-creation or involvement of gender experts? This question for you as well.
Maybe I can respond to that. You will find some more examples as well in the topic guide, as Gail mentioned, but we will include as well some pilot that we conducted in Ahmedabad to see the bus stop infrastructure. So in the bus stop, it's not only to have like lighting in the bus stop, but to have comfortable seatings in the bus stops, to have transparency so that people can see itself in the bus stop, because a lot of cases of sexual harassment happen there. So all these specific things into the infrastructure shall have to be considered, so that whenever a woman, want to go and stop the bus, she feels safe. Of course, men as well, again, but like we're much more vulnerable, and this can be already included. Another example, if not thinking about infrastructure, but KPIs, it's the percentage of women moving in public transport and the time that they take to their in their commuting. I can provide examples, but you will find that the topic good.
Okay, and the last question before moving to the last part, it is about, could we integrate this topic in a more inclusive way, so that is not gender oriented but more for everyone? For example, children, people with disabilities, old people, and so on.
I was
Can
just typing
respond to that. Okay.
Sorry, I was
Please
just typing into the chat, but my answer to that actually is yes, definitely. When we're talking about something that's gender responsive, urban mobility planning, we're targeting, or we're talking about gender here, because women are usually the biggest subset that's forgotten. And when we're talking about that, as I mentioned earlier, it's also challenging. What about children, persons with disabilities, younger people, older people? That's definitely something that we also need to think about. But we have to get used to thinking outside of just what is traditionally being done. And so, since women typically are like 50% of the world, we're like trying to practice seeing out of what we're used to by starting with this big subset. And then, I mean, generally, yes, we should be including children, people with disabilities, old people, and others that we might not be aware of, that we're excluding. But yeah, maybe I pass to Gail. Did you want to say something?
I was going to say much of what you were going to say, Keisha, that we do very often talk about women and marginalized groups or vulnerable groups. But I do again think that we need to be careful about not being, I'm trying to think of the word. The thing is that it's a lot like what I was saying earlier, is that we do have to be honest about these issues, is that we can't keep being obsequious in our requests to be noticed. So we shouldn't spend too much time thinking, or let's kind of not be quite so obvious about what we want, or let's sort of be a bit more inclusive so that we're not asking for what we need, and let's also add a whole lot of other people. And it's kind of, we are in many respects succumbing to the norms of the society that we really live in, if we are trying to make our message more acceptable and more palatable. I know that we need to find the balance between our message being heard, but if we're constantly striving to make it more acceptable, then we sort of, we are supporting the status quo in many respects. So again, that is an ideological response, not a transport response. So I'll end it there.
Okay. Thank you for answering the questions. And since we're running out of time, so I suggest to move to the last part. And with the remaining time, we can continue with the questions from the participants. So the last part is with Diana. And it's about, so we were talking now about the publication, moving, and now it's like more moving from theories, let's say. Sorry. Yeah. No. So yeah, we move from just a second. So we move from more theoretical framework into a practice, and this is the last part. So I'm gonna share my screen. Play from the current slide. Yeah. You cannot share it for some reason. Why I cannot share it? Now I will give the floor to Jana to explain her part.
Thank you, Karine, and good morning and good afternoon, everyone. So first of all, thank you very much for the invitation to this important space. So today I will share with you the Colombian experience of designing the national strategy for active mobility with a gender and differential approach developed between 2021 and 2022 and financed by the European Union. So first of all, I just would like to clarify that I'm speaking today not on behalf of the government, of the national government, or the Ministry of Transport, but from my personal and technical experience, since I was part of the coordination team that developed this strategy. So you can go to the next one. Thank you. So here is the structure of my presentation. I will start with a short introduction and the Colombian context. Then I will explain why the country decided to design a national strategy for active mobility with a gender and differential approach. And after that, I will present what the strategy is, its benefits, how it was designed, and its guiding principles, and finally, what it proposed in terms of actions. So the next one, please. As introduction, so Colombia is a very in Colombia, mobility is deeply marked by inequality and geography. When we look a map of Colombia, we see a country with a vast difference between centers, urban areas, and regions affected by different kind of conflicts and limited infrastructure. So these differences are not only territorial, but also social and cultural. So for instance, women and girls in rural areas often have to walk long distance to access education, health services, of work opportunities, and in urban areas, issues like safety in public space, street lighting, and harassment in transport systems limit their freedom or movement. So mobility is also shaped by socioeconomic conditions. People in low-income neighborhoods often spend more time and money commuting, with fewer safe options for walking or cycling, for example. And meanwhile, those who own cars enjoy more comfort, but this perpetuates inequalities and environment impacts. So we cannot forget disability and age, as we said before. So older adults, children, or people with reduced mobility face physical and social barriers that prevent them from using infrastructure safely and independently. And as has been said throughout this session, urban mobility is not neutral. So has I think so Keisha said. So when we say mobility is not neutral, we mean that it reflects existing inequalities. Recognizing this diversity is not only a matter of equity, but also efficiency and sustainability. Because if mobility policies ignore these realities, they will fail to reach those who need them the most. So as a country, we also have strong international commitments for reducing greenhouse emissions, so especially from transport sector and other sectors. So this context created a clear opportunity to design a national strategy that would not only address climate goals, but also social and gender inequalities. So you can go to the next one. So that is why the national strategy for active mobility and gender and differential with gender and differential approach is so relevant. So it seeks to provide tools and guidelines that respond to this diversity, making sure that walking, cycling, and other ways to active mobility becomes safe, accessible, and inclusive options for all people in Colombia, regardless gender, age, disability, or place of residence, for example. So Now, this strategy could have been only about promoting walking and cycling and active mobility as sustainable modes of transport, but we decided to go further. So why? Because mobility is never neutral, as we said, so it reflects social inequalities and it can either reproduce them or help transform them. So we look at how people move in different spaces and cities, and we see differences. And women often travel shorter distance, make more multi-purpose trips, and are more likely to walk. And also children, older adults, or people with disabilities also face specific challenges, from lack of infrastructure to safety concerns. So ignoring these realities means leaving a large part of the population behind. So that is why we incorporate gender and intersectional perspectives. So active mobility is not only about reducing emissions or improving public health, it is also about guaranteeing access to opportunities, education, jobs, healthcare, social life, and for that it must respond to the actual needs of all groups. So this meant designing a strategy that promotes equity, safety, and inclusion, not just climate benefits. In other words, walking and cycling is not are not ends in themselves, but tools to build a more just, safe, and sustainable society. So the next one, what is the ENMA? Because the acronym in Spanish. So the National Strategy for Active Mobility with Gender and Differential Approach is one of the Colombia's high climate relevance actions. Its main goal is to create instruments, guidelines, as we said, and interventions to promote active mobility across the whole territory and to foster the green recovery of Colombia cities. And it is directly aligned with Colombia's commitments under the NDC. So yes, that is in grosso modo the ENMA. So what does active? We can go ahead to the next one. So what does active mobility mean here in this strategy? So it was important to us to understand what we understand with active mobility. So in this strategy is defined active mobility very broadly. So it includes trips of people and goods powered by one's own energy or using mechanical or assisted device in the case of a disability. And it can happen in urban or rural areas, and it may be a single trip or combined with other modes such as public transport. And active mobility serves many purposes, for example, work, caregiving, study, tourism, leisure, or even sport activities. And this broad definition was key to ensure inclusivity. And go for the next. So in terms of gender and differential approach, so the ENMA, the strategy, explicitly recognize that people have different characteristic, conditions, and needs when moving to public spaces. So, for example, caregiving trips are the third common reason for women's travel after work and study. So women are the main users of public transport, and the first stage of these trips is usually on foot. So this is why it is essential to analyze the experiences of women, people with disabilities, and those with reduced mobility, for example. So historically, mobility planning has been shaped by patriarchal vision, for example, creating barriers for vulnerable groups. So this strategy seeks to change that. Now we're going to talk about the benefits of this strategy with a gender perspective, with a differential approach. So we can go to the next one. So in related to the gender perspective, integrating women into active mobility activities through training, employment, and new roles means greater economic autonomy and inclusion in non-traditional jobs. So in Colombia, for example, unpaid domestic and care work represents 20% of the national GDP. Of all people performing care work, 78% are women. So recognizing and valuing this work is crucial. So public policies, infrastructure for active mobility, and social protection system must support women's mobility needs and reduce these inequalities. And related to differential approach and the benefits of active mobility. The next one, please. So from a differential perspective, public spaces and spaces and active mobility can create more inclusive environments. So universal design, for example, ensures that everyone, regardless of disability, can access and enjoy spaces without restrictions. So improving mobility for people with disabilities is not only a matter of rights, it is also key to reduce inequalities and poverty in the country and also in the region. So now we're going to talk about the guiding principles of the strategy. So you can go ahead, Nico. And this strategy is not just a list of actions. It is built on guiding principles that reflect how we want to transform mobility and public space in Colombia. So these principles help us ensure that active mobility is not only possible, but also attractive, safe, and inclusive for everyone. So the first one, the principle was a healthy city. So this principle prioritizes life and public space, promoting environments that foster health and well-being. So active mobility is understood as a concrete solution to address public health challenges, such as sedentary lifestyles and air pollution, for example. So streets and public spaces should be designed for all stages of life, so children, just adults, older people, so that natural and safe and healthy options. The second principle, it's accessibility. So it's not just about building infrastructure, it is about ensuring that everyone can actually use it. So that means overcoming not only physical barriers, but also social, economic, and political ones. So inclusive designing is key, but it is proper coordination between planning, urban development, and infrastructure investment. So in short, accessibility means that mobility should not depend on privilege, but should be a right for all. So another principle, it was diverse people. So Colombia are diverse, Colombians people are diverse. So are their mobility needs. Projects must be planned, designed, and implemented with this diversity in mind. So age, gender, ethnicity, physical and mental conditions, among others. So the principle of diverse people ensures that the experience of mobility is positive for everyone, regardless of who they are or where they live. Another principle, it was care for life. So caring for life is at the heart of the strategy. You share your screen in different way, Nico, so we are not seeing the presentation. Thank you. So yes, caring for life is at the heart of the strategy. It means putting people's health, safety, and well-being above motorized vehicles, for example. So this principle seeks to create safe streets that reduce road traffic, deaths, and injuries. Yes, while increasing people's sense of security and confidence when walking or cycling. So another principle is coherence with climate change. So that is super important. So active mobility is also a climate action. As the planet faces rapidly increasing temperatures, Colombia recognized that the need of concrete strategies to reduce emissions from transport. So promoting walking and cycling is one of the most direct and effective ways to align urban development with climate commitments. Another principle is the street as an integrated space. The last one, so the street must be redefined. Streets are not just for vehicles. They are main stage of public life, a space for encounter, coexistence, and safety. So the strategy promotes equitable distribution of public space, creating complete streets, for example, with calm traffic, where active modes are prioritized. So these 6 principles provide the foundation of the strategy. So they remind us that active mobility is not simply a transport policy, it's a social, environmental, and cultural transformation. So now we can talk about how it was designed. We can go to the next one. So to design the strategy, we carry out diagnosis across Colombia, most of them across 38 cities in Colombia. So most of them small and medium size. Only 4 cities have more than 1 million inhabitants. So, but beyond collecting data, this process was deeply participatory. So we work together with local governments, national entities, civil society, and community organizations. So listening to different voices was essential because the barriers and opportunities for active mobility look very different depending on context, gender, age, and territory, as we said. So from this participatory process, we defined 6 main lines of work: governance, regulation, planning, infrastructure, cultural change, and finance. So these lines became the backbone of the strategy. So within each of them, we identify key challenges. So from those challenges, we build the objectives and overall structure of the national strategy. Some important findings also guide us. So nearly 1/3 of trips in the cities are already made through active modes like walking and cycling, mostly walking. And interestingly, 43% of the municipalities surveyed already had a department responsible for addressing the gender gap. So this showed a fertile ground to build on and the importance of aligning efforts through a clear, inclusive, and national framework. So the general objective of the ENMA, of the strategy, in the next one, is this general objective is to promote the strengthened active mobility with a gender and differential approach, as we said, at the national level, so aligned with climate change management and air quality goals. So the vision is to consolidate healthy and safe cities that prioritize care for life, accessibility and inclusion for all people through public spaces and foster encounter coexistence and citizen safety. So now we talk about what we proposed in the next one. So the strategy proposes 16 specific actions. You can go ahead for the next one, Nico. And these 16 actions to respond its objectives of the strategy. So I will not go into detail on each of them here because they are quite extensive, but I do want to highlight some examples to show the scope and diversity of the strategy. So, for instance, some actions focus on strengthening governance and coordination, such as creating spaces and incentives for regulatory, financial, and institutional alignment, or promoting citizen participation, so that communities, especially women and vulnerable groups, can influence projects directly. So other infrastructure and planning. This includes updating design manuals to recognize care-related mobility, for example, and encouraging decision makers to prioritize active modes over private cars, and promoting integration between active mobility and public transport. And the strategy also seeks to mainstream active mobility into broader planning instruments like municipal development plans or sustainable and safe mobility plans, and ensuring continuity beyond political cycles. So even if it's a national strategy, we really want to encourage the municipalities to develop their sustainable mobility plans with this approach, with gender and differential approach in the active mobility. So another important dimension is data and monitoring. So for example, one of the actions is to generate a national information system that allows us to analyze active mobility with gender sensitive indicators, so we can measure both progress and gaps. So finally, some actions tackle financing and regulation, such as updating traffic laws to include micromobility, for example, and safe system principles, or promoting investment mechanisms that ensure resources are allocated to projects with a gender and differential approach. So across these actions, the gender and differential perspective is not an isolated line. It cuts across the entire strategy. So the goal is that every action, whether in governance, infrastructure planning, or financing, contributes to build a safer, and more inclusive and equitable cities. So we can go for the last one, I think so. So I just want to share with you this key message. So is that the strategy demonstrates that something very important. So it is possible to embed gender and differential perspectives from the very beginning of a national strategy, not as an afterthought. So yes, to close, I would like to thank you again. So for the opportunity to share with you this national strategy, this Colombian experience. So yes, promoting active mobility means promoting healthier, safer, and more sustainable cities. But more importantly, it is also about equity and rights. So better mobility is inclusive mobility. So yes, and there you can find the full document. It's in Spanish, but you have my mail also if you want to, if you have any question. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Diana, for this presentation. And of course, it's an interesting way to promote active mobility. And of course, if I want to look at the participants' comments in the Q&A, so a strong political will is needed to do this plan. So if it lacks, I don't think that it's going to happen. And yeah, and to be like, and to as a summary, I feel like it's to be on the move. It has its own challenges. So it's not about only, it goes beyond the gender, like woman or man. It tackles everyone. So to be able to create a city that is livable, walkable, safe for everyone, we should invest in an infrastructure that is suitable for all. And I would like to ask you, Diana, a question. So it's more than the bus stop itself. It's more, so it's how to create a city that well integrated and promotes inclusive mobility. So how can other cities from the worldwide, because it's about now sharing knowledge from with everyone, with other cities, and if they want to implement this national strategy, what do you recommend, like, to take as key takeaways for other cities to that have the more or less the same context but different challenges, let's say?
Yes, thank you. Yes, so I think the most important is in a diagnosis part. For example, this strategy was designed as a collaborative process, so with multiple ministries, local governments, and civil society organizations. So I think this is very important. It includes these recommendations of people and their experiences. So this strategy, for example, includes flexible tools and recommendations that can be adapted to different territorial realities. So from large cities to small towns and rural areas. So I think also a part that is very important is capacity building and monitoring mechanism that will be integrated to help institutions translate the guidelines into local actions. So yes, I know everything, it depends on the context, the different territories and the different dynamics in the different cities. But I think it's very important to take into account the experience of people in these territories, and to articulate the different entities and entities, society organizations, to incorporate the different point of views. Yeah.
Okay, and how did the people actually react to these plans?
What
I,
do
I,
you mean?
yeah, I mean, like, so I feel like it's kind of a top-down approach, let's say. So it was co-created with civil society and so on. But when you put it into implementation, because sometimes people react badly or they accepted that. So how they actually reacted?
Yes, I think one of the most important things is the will of the politicians. So it's important that people in politics have the willing to incorporate this approach. And I think another part for people to act related to this action is to appropriate the different actions. So yes, it is mostly related to the appropriation with the city, with the different mechanisms that they can take. Just for example, the different actions to promote the cycling in a city. It's important the articulation with these society groups or these society organizations, because of them, they are going to put in territories the real actions.
Okay. Thank you, Jenna, for this presentation. And I feel like this session we're almost done. So the last few notes. So as at the beginning, I said that this training session was prepared between TUMI, Mobilize Your City, Women Mobilize Women and Heat. So if you want to replicate this training, please contact the Secretariat, Mobilize Your City, so we can give you the guidelines and help you. And the last thing is, I hope you found this training session useful. And I would like to thank all the speakers that joined this session. It was interesting. And now we have we challenged the word gender, let's say. And if you want to learn more about this topic guide, please have a look. You can scan the QR code or you can check it out in the chat. Thank you all, and have a good afternoon.